Picture this. It's late at night, you're hunched over a desk, a textbook splayed open, the scent of coffee hanging heavy in the air. A yellow highlighter is clutched in your hand like a weapon against the coming dawn of an exam. You've been at this for hours, meticulously reading, rereading, and painting entire pages with fluorescent ink, convinced that by sheer force of will, you can observe the information on the page. You feel productive. You feel like you're putting in the work. Then the next day arrives. You sit down to take the test, or you try to recall that crucial piece of information for a meeting, and it's fuzzy. It's like a dream you can't quite grasp. The concepts you spent all night wrestling with are now vague shadows in your mind. You can recognize them, sure, but you can't reproduce them. All that effort, all those hours, seem to have evaporated into thin air. If this scenario feels painfully familiar, you're not alone. It is the classic tale of a well-intentioned learner confusing effort with effectiveness. We've been conditioned to believe that the harder we work, the more hours we pour in, the better we will learn. But what if that's not just inefficient? What if it's fundamentally wrong? What if the most common study habits, the ones we've used our entire lives, are actually some of the least effective ways to build lasting knowledge? Welcome back, my friends, to our lifelong learning theme for this week. Well, our theme for this week is for anyone who believes their best days of learning are still ahead of them. Now remember, the first episode of the theme was about building the foundational mindset for growth. Today is about filling your toolbox. We're moving from the why to the how. This episode is for everyone who is tired of working hard and is ready to start working smart. We're going to dissect 3 of the most potent, science-backed, and frankly, counterintuitive techniques for rapid and durable learning. These aren't gimmicks or life hacks. They are methods grounded in decades of cognitive psychology research proven to work with the natural architecture of the human brain, not against it. My friends, in this episode, we'll tackle some burning questions. Why is the simple act of closing your book and trying to remember what you just read 100 times more powerful than reading it one more time? How can strategic forgetting and a carefully timed schedule of reviews actually supercharge your memory, making knowledge stick for years, not days? What can a Nobel Prize-winning physicist, famous for his ability to explain complex ideas with profound simplicity, teach us about truly understanding a topic rather than just memorizing its facts? And how can we combine these methods to create a synergistic learning system that will accelerate our progress in any field, from mastering French grammar to understanding the intricacies of a new software? My friends, this episode is intensely practical. I'm going to give you concrete, actionable strategies that you can implement the moment this episode ends. But be forewarned, these methods often feel harder and less productive in the moment than their passive counterparts. They require active, strenuous mental effort. And as always, we must remember that these techniques are tools, not magic wands. True mastery still requires diligence, curiosity, and the deep, immersive work of engaging with the subject. This podcast is just a map, but you are the one who must embark on the journey. These tools will make your journey more efficient and your destination more certain, but they will not eliminate the need to walk the path. So, if you're ready to trade your highlighter for a set of cognitive power tools and revolutionize the way you learn, you've come to the right place. Let's learn how to learn smarter, not harder. And of course, don't forget that you're listening to English Plus Podcast. So, after we finish talking about this, we're going to have our language focus section, in which we're going to talk about vocabulary, our speaking challenge, our writing challenge, coupled with some grammar tips and tricks for you to take your English to the next level. But first, let's take your knowledge to the next level. That's coming next. Don't go anywhere. I'll be right back. Welcome back, my friends. In our last episode, we laid the critical groundwork by exploring the power of growth mindset, the belief that our abilities can be developed. That mindset is the engine. But an engine, no matter how powerful, is useless without a transmission and wheels to turn that power into forward motion, right? Today, we're building the drivetrain. We're talking about the specific, high leverage techniques that will translate your effort into tangible, lasting knowledge. For decades, students and learners of all ages have defaulted to a set of learning strategies that cognitive scientists now know are remarkably inefficient. The big three culprits are rereading material, highlighting key passages, and summarizing texts. Now, of course, these are not useless. I can't say that. They are useful. But on the spectrum of effectiveness, they are low-powered tools. They create what's known as the illusion of competence. When you reread a chapter, the information feels familiar. Your brain says, yes, I know this. But there is a monumental difference between recognizing something and being able to recall it. Recognition is passive. Recall is active. And that distinction is the key to our first technique. Our first technique is called active recall. If there is one technique that you take away from this episode, let it be this one. Active recall, sometimes called retrieval practice or simply self-testing. This is the act of actively retrieving a piece of information from your brain. It's the process of closing the book, turning away from the screen, and asking yourself, what did I just learn? What were the key ideas here? How would I explain this to someone? Think of it this way. Imagine you want to strengthen your bicep. You wouldn't do it by simply watching a video of someone lifting a dumbbell over and over, right? That's absurd. You build the muscle by putting it under strain, by making it perform the act of lifting. Learning works in exactly the same way. Your brain doesn't build strong memories by passively receiving information. It builds them by actively pulling that information out. Each time you successfully retrieve a memory, you strengthen its neural pathway, making it easier and faster to access in the future. Rereading is like watching the video. Active recall is lifting the weight. It feels harder, more strenuous, because it is. That feeling of struggle is not a sign of failure. It is the sign of effective learning in progress. It is the cognitive equivalent of a muscle burning on the last repetition of a set. So, how do you put this into practice? Well, it's incredibly versatile. For language learners trying to memorize vocabulary, the classic example is flashcards. But there's a right way and a wrong way to use them. The wrong way is to look at the word in your native language, then passively flip the card to see the translation. The right way, the active recall way, is to look at the word and force your brain to produce the answer before you flip the card. Say it out loud, write it down. The struggle to remember is the magic ingredient. For understanding complex concepts, like a new grammar rule, read the explanation once. Then close the book and try to write down a summary of the rule in your own words. Create 3 of your own example sentences using the rule correctly. You will immediately discover the fuzzy parts of your understanding. Well, this is crucial. Active recall is not just a memory tool, it is a diagnostic tool. It shines a harsh, unforgiving light on what you don't actually know yet. At the end of a study session, or even at the end of a work day where you learned a new process, take 2 minutes. Grab a blank piece of paper and write down everything you can remember. This is called a brain dump. It forces recall on all the key points and helps consolidate the information you just spent time on. The message is simple. Stop being a passive information sponge. Start being an active, demanding interrogator of your own mind. So that's about the first technique. The second technique is spaced repetition. Now, active recall is incredibly potent, but its power is magnified exponentially when combined with our second technique, spaced repetition. If active recall is what you do, spaced repetition is when you do it. Now, to understand this, we need to meet a 19th century German psychologist named Hermann Ebbinghaus. He was one of the first people to scientifically study memory, and he discovered something rather depressing known as the forgetting curve. The curve shows that when you learn something new, you forget it at an exponential rate. You might forget more than half of it within a day, and the vast majority within a week. It's a steep, slippery slope. Now, many learners try to combat this with what I call brute force learning, which everybody knows as cramming. They review the material over and over and over again in one long session right before an exam. Well, this can work for short-term memorization, but the forgetting curve always wins. A week later, almost all of that crammed information is gone. Spaced repetition is the elegant, strategic solution to this problem. The core idea is this: to make a memory last, you should review the information at strategic, increasing intervals of time. You interrupt the forgetting curve at the precise moment it's about to fall off a cliff. Each time you do this, the rate of forgetting slows down. The curve becomes shallower. So instead of reviewing a new vocabulary word 20 times in one day, you would review it using active recall, and then you would review it again a day later. Then perhaps 3 days after that, then a week later, then 2 weeks, then a month. By spacing out the reviews, you are telling your brain, hey, this piece of information is actually important. It keeps coming up. Don't discard it. Move it from short-term to long-term storage. And that's exactly what's happening. Now, this might sound complicated to manage, but it's actually quite simple. Imagine a set of physical flashcards. You could have several boxes. Box 1 for daily review, Box 2 for every 3 days, Box 3 for weekly, and so on. When you get a card right, you promote it to the next box. If you get it wrong, you demote it back to Box 1. This is the famous Leitner system. But we live in the 21st century, and technology has made this incredibly easy. Spaced repetition software, or SRS, is widely available. Apps like Anki, Quizlet, and Memrise have these algorithms built in. You create digital flashcards, and the software automatically schedules them for you. And by the way, talking about Quizlet, I will have to say it now because it is almost in every single magazine article that we have on our website, EnglishPlusPodcast.com. Well, in every magazine article, especially the new ones, the ones I've published in the past year, they all have an embedded Quizlet activity. And this means that you can actually use it for this spaced repetition exercise. It's incredibly useful. I'm not just saying that to tell you about what we have in English Plus Podcast, which we do, obviously, but it is the closest thing to a silver bullet you can get. So please use the website. It's yours for the taking. But anyway, let's get back to our topic. So, as I told you, we live in the 21st century, so these things are incredibly easy. I mean, maybe 30 or 40 years ago, it was a little bit difficult, but not that difficult. Even if you don't have all these things, you can still make those boxes, you can still make your own flashcards, and maybe that's the better option for you. Maybe you like it this way, fine, do it. Or if you like to use any of these apps, they will help you because, as I told you, the algorithms are already built in. You create digital flashcards, and the software automatically schedules them for you. It shows you the cards you are most likely to forget right when you need to see them. It is perhaps the most efficient system ever devised for memorizing a large body of information. For language learners, medical students, law students, anyone who needs to commit a large vocabulary of facts to memory, it is an absolute game changer. Now, the key takeaway is that learning and forgetting are two sides of the same coin. The struggle to recall something you've almost forgotten is a powerful signal to the brain to consolidate that memory. Spaced repetition systematically engineers these moments of desirable difficulty. So that's the second technique I wanted to tell you about. Next, I have a very special technique. You might have heard of active recall before, spaced repetition. I hope that I explained them in a way that will make you feel how important they are. Or maybe you really understand now what they mean, and more importantly, their effect. But this third method is a little bit unknown by a lot of people, but it is very famous, and it was named after a very famous physicist. This one is the Feynman Technique. Now, our first two techniques are phenomenal for memorizing facts and concepts. But what about deep intuitive understanding? What about when you want to not just know something, but truly get it? For that, we learn to the legendary Nobel Prize-winning physicist Richard Feynman. Feynman was a genius, no doubt, but his true superpower was his ability to make incredibly complex ideas seem simple. He had a visceral disdain for jargon, overly complex terminology, and shallow explanations. He believed that if you couldn't explain something in simple terms, you didn't really understand it. Out of this philosophy came the method now known as the Feynman Technique, and it is a devastatingly effective tool for deconstructing any topic. It consists of 4 simple steps. Step 1. Choose a concept you want to understand. Let's say for a language learner, it's the difference between the Spanish verbs ser and estar, both of which mean to be, a notoriously tricky concept. Now, step 2, pretend you are teaching this concept to a child. Grab a piece of paper and write down an explanation as if you were talking to a 10-year-old. This is the crucial part. You are forced to avoid complex grammatical terms. You can't say, well, ser is for essential characteristics and estar is for temporary states. A kid won't get that. You have to use simple language and analogies. You can say things like, okay, imagine ser is like your eye color. It's part of who you are. It doesn't usually change. I am tall. Soy alto. But estar is like how you are feeling. You might be happy right now, but sad later. Estoy feliz. See the difference? That's step number 2. Now let's move on to step number 3. Identify your knowledge gaps. Inevitably, as you try to simplify, you will get stuck. And that's normal. You will realize your explanation is clunky, or that you're not quite sure about an edge case. You'll think, wait, what about death? Is a person permanently dead with ser or temporarily dead with estar? These moments of hesitation are pure gold. They are the blind spots in your understanding that passive reading would never have revealed. And now let's move on to step number 4. Go back to the source material, fill your knowledge gaps, and then refine your simple explanation. You'd look it up and learn that ser is used for death, treating it as a resulting characteristic. Then you'd simplify again, and you would say things like, and even for big things like being dead, we use ser. It's like that their new permanent description. You repeat this process until you have a clear, simple, and eloquent explanation. My friends, the Feynman technique is so powerful because it ruthlessly exposes any illusion of competence. It's impossible to hide behind fancy vocabulary when you're forced to explain something simply. It transforms you from a passive recipient of knowledge into an active creator of it. It forces you to build mental models and analogies, which leads to a much deeper and more flexible understanding of the topic. So, there you have it. 3 potent synergistic techniques. You use active recall to pull information from your mind. You use spaced repetition to schedule those recall attempts at ever-increasing intervals, maximizing long-term retention. And you use the Feynman technique to attack your most stubborn knowledge gaps and ensure you have a true, deep understanding of the core concepts. And my friends, let me assure you, these are not shortcuts. They require effort, discipline, and a willingness to embrace the struggle. But the promise is this: the time you invest in learning will yield far greater and more lasting results. You will build a foundation of knowledge that doesn't crumble after the test is over. You will learn smarter, not just harder. And that is a skill that will serve you for the rest of your life. Well, that's the topic for today, my friends, and I hope that you learned a thing or two from it, but it's not over. It's not over yet because we're English Plus. Again, we just talked about the plus part where we take your knowledge to the next level, but now it's time for the English part where I take your English to the next level. Let's focus on language next, and we'll start with vocabulary and speaking. Don't go anywhere, I'll be right back. Alright, that was our crash course in 3 powerful learning techniques. Now, as we always do, let's put on our language learning glasses and zoom in on some of the vocabulary we used. The goal here is to arm you with precise, powerful words so you can discuss these ideas and many others with more clarity and confidence. After we break down the words, we'll put them to work in a speaking challenge. Now let's start with the words first. Let's begin with a word I used to describe these learning methods. Counterintuitive. Counterintuitive. Of course, these are 2 words. Counterintuitive. Now, I said they are frankly counterintuitive about the methods I just told you about. Something that is counterintuitive goes against your gut feeling or what you would expect to be logical. It seems wrong at first glance, even though it's correct. For example, the idea that struggling to remember something is better for learning than easily rereading, it is deeply counterintuitive. Our instinct is to make things easy for ourselves. You can use this word in many situations. You can say, for example, it's counterintuitive, but slowing down your car in icy conditions can sometimes give you more control than speeding up. Or the advice was counterintuitive. To get more done, he needed to schedule more breaks and work fewer hours. It's a great adjective to describe a surprising but true idea. And make sure that the idea is true, not the idea is wrong, right? But anyway, that was counterintuitive. Let's next talk about potent. The adjective potent, P-O-T-A-N-T. I call these techniques potent and science-packed. Now, potent simply means having great power, influence, or effect. It's a step above strong or effective. It implies a concentrated power. You might talk about a potent drug, a potent argument, or a potent spice in a dish. For instance, her speech was a potent reminder of the injustices the community was facing. Or we can say, the small chili pepper had a surprisingly potent kick. When you call a learning strategy potent, you're saying it delivers a powerful result for the effort invested. And now let's talk about retention. R-E-T-E-N-T-I-O-N, retention. Now, I mentioned that spaced repetition maximizes long-term retention. Now, retention is the continued possession, use, or control of something. In the context of learning, it means the ability to keep information in your memory. It's the noun form of the verb to retain. A company might focus on customer retention, which means keeping its customers. An organization might focus on employee retention, meaning keeping its staff from leaving. In our case, we're talking about knowledge retention. We can say, for example, the school's new teaching methods led to a significant increase in student retention of historical facts. Well, I know that it is a more formal word, but it's a more precise word than just saying memory. Okay? Remember this word, retention, very important. Now let's move on to the next word, consolidate. Now, I said that a brain dump helps consolidate the information you've learned. To consolidate means to make something physically stronger or more solid. It also means to combine a number of things into a single, more effective or coherent whole. In neuroscience, memory consolidation is the process where the brain converts short-term memories into stable, long-term ones. And that's exactly what we're talking about. You can consolidate power, consolidate debt, or consolidate your findings into a single report. For example, you can say, after the merger, the company worked to consolidate its operations into one headquarters. Or, take some time at the end of the day to consolidate your thoughts and plan for tomorrow. It implies making something stronger and better organized. And that's exactly what we do, as we talked in the episode, when we consolidate our memories, or the things we want to remember stronger. Now let's move on to a new word. This word is synergistic. And synergistic is spelled S-Y-N-E-R-G-I-S-T-I-C, synergistic. Now, I use the word synergistic to describe how these techniques work together. Now, something is synergistic when the interaction of different elements produces an effect that is greater than the sum of their individual effects. I know, the explanation is kind of crazy, but think of it as just 1 + 1 = 3. And of course, that doesn't make sense in arithmetic, but in ideas and in people, yes, it does. Even more than 3 sometimes. Now let's get back to what we talked about in the topic. Now, I said active recall is great. Spaced repetition is great, of course. On their own, they're great. But when you use them together, the result is even more powerful than just adding their effects. That's why we call them synergistic. And this word is fantastic to use in the context of business and science. For example, we can say, the partnership was synergistic, with one company's marketing expertise perfectly complementing the other's technical innovation. It describes a relationship where the whole is truly greater than the sum of its parts. That's the word synergistic. And of course, this is the adjective, the noun is synergy. And now let's look at another word. Let's look at the adjective eloquent. E-L-O-Q-U-E-N-T. Eloquent. Now, when describing the Feynman technique, I said the goal is to arrive at a clear, simple, and eloquent explanation. Eloquent means fluent and persuasive in speaking or writing. It suggests a certain grace, power, and beauty in the use of language. It's about being clear but also artful. An eloquent speech can move people to tears. An eloquent argument can change minds. An eloquent piece of writing is a joy to read. For example, we can say, despite his simple vocabulary, he was an incredibly eloquent speaker who could capture the attention of any audience. And my friends, this is a wonderful compliment to pay someone's communication skills. Now let's talk about a verb that's perfect for problem solving. Pinpoint. P-I-N-P-O-I-N-T. Pinpoint. Now, the Feynman technique helps you pinpoint your knowledge gaps. To pinpoint something means to find or identify its exact position or nature. It implies a high degree of precision. It's like putting a pin on a map. You're not just saying, I'm confused about this chapter. You're saying, I'm confused about this specific part of this formula. Now, you could say, for example, the mechanic was able to pinpoint the exact cause of the engine noise. Or you can say, it's difficult to pinpoint the single reason for the company's success, as many factors were involved. All right, my friends, that's pinpoint. You can use it in many contexts. Now let's move on to brute force. I use the phrase brute force, B-R-U-T-E, force, of course, is F-O-R-C-E, brute force. Now, I use this phrase to describe cramming. A brute force approach is one that relies on overwhelming power or repetition rather than strategy or finesse. Now, a brute force attack in computing, for example, is trying every possible password combination. You might have heard about that in cybersecurity contexts. In our learning context, it's the idea of just studying for 12 straight hours, hoping that sheer effort will work. Now, it's often inefficient, especially for the long term, but can sometimes be effective if you have no other choice. I mean, let's face it, right? Now, let me give you an example of how we can use this word, not in this context, in other contexts as well. Without the key, they had to open the door using brute force. Or we can say, he solved the math problem by brute force, testing every number until he found the answer. It's a great phrase to contrast with a more strategic approach. Okay, that's brute force for you, my friends. Now let's talk about efficacy. E-F-F-I-C-A-C-Y. Now, while I didn't use this exact word, it's a perfect word for this topic. Efficacy is the ability to produce a desired or intended result. It's a more formal synonym for effectiveness, often used in scientific or medical contexts. Now, you would talk about the efficacy of a new drug or the efficacy of a government policy. In our case, we are questioning the efficacy of passive study techniques like rereading and highlighting, and championing the high efficacy of methods like active recall. Well, let me give you an example on how we can use this word. The clinical trial was designed to test the efficacy and safety of the new vaccine. All right? See how we use it? It's a very useful word when you want to discuss how well something works in a formal or evidence-based way. And that brings me to the last word I want to talk to you about, and this one is delve into. And this is a very useful phrasal verb. And delve is spelled D-E-L-V-E, delve into. Now, this means to explore or research a subject in detail. It's more active and engaged than just looking at or studying. It suggests digging deep, like an archaeologist excavating a site. For example, in this book, the author doesn't just skim the surface. She really delves into the complexities of the historical period. Or, we don't have time to delve into the details today, but I'll send a follow-up email. It's a great way to talk about going deep on a topic. Okay? So, the words we talked about, let me remind you. We talked about counterintuitive, potent, retention, consolidate, synergistic, eloquent, pinpoint, brute force, efficacy, and delve into. These are excellent tools for your linguistic toolkits. And now, let's put them into practice. Here's your speaking challenge for today. I want you to prepare a 2 to 3 minute talk on this topic. Choose a complex skill or topic you're currently learning or want to learn in the future. Describe how you would design a personal learning plan using the 3 techniques we discussed today, and remember, be specific, okay? To succeed in this challenge, I want you to try and do the following. First, start by explaining why a simple brute force approach won't work for this topic and why a more strategic plan is needed. Second, explain how you would use active recall and spaced repetition. Will you use flashcards? Will you use an app? How will this help your long-term retention? And third, explain how you would use the Feynman Technique. What specific concepts would you delve into? How would this help you pinpoint your weaknesses and develop a more eloquent understanding? And finally, conclude by explaining why you believe this synergistic combination of techniques will have a higher efficacy than just passively studying. You might even acknowledge that the plan seems counterintuitive, but that you trust the process. The goal, my friends, is to weave these vocabulary words into a coherent, practical plan. Record yourself, play it back. Does it sound natural? The point, of course, as usual, isn't to be perfect. It's to take these words off the page and put them into your mouth, to make them your own. It's your chance to consolidate what we've learned today. So, good luck. And of course, if you want to share your recordings with me, I'll be more than happy to listen to whatever you record. And of course, let me remind you that you can do that on my Patreon page. And for those who are kind of afraid of my Patreon page, thinking that the moment you go there, I start asking for money, it's not like that. You can become a member for free for as long as you want, and only when you choose to unlock all the other episodes and all the other things that I put there for my paying members, but no pressure. If you want to join the community, come over to my Patreon page, and it will be a lot easier for you to communicate with me. But now it's time for us to move to our second part of our Focus on Language section, and this one is about grammar and writing. It's coming next, don't go anywhere, I'll be right back. Having sharpened our speaking skills, let's now turn our attention to writing. Writing is not just about communication. It's a powerful tool for thinking. When you write a how-to guide, you are forced to organize your thoughts with absolute clarity. And that is precisely your challenge for this episode. I want you to choose one of the 3 learning techniques we discussed: active recall, spaced repetition, or the Feynman Technique, and I want you to write a 500-word instructional guide explaining this technique to a friend or colleague who has never heard of it. Your goal is to be exceptionally clear, persuasive, and practical. Use a specific real-life learning scenario, for example, preparing for a professional certification, learning a new software, or mastering a musical instrument to illustrate each step of the process. This is a test of your ability to be a teacher. To make your guide effective, you need the right tools, both in terms of writing techniques and grammar. So let's break down what you'll need to succeed. First, let's talk grammar. The most critical grammatical tool for any set of instructions is the imperative mood. The imperative is the form of the verb used to give commands, instructions, and advice. It's the base form of the verb. Go, write, choose, and the subject, you, is implied. Your guide should be full of clear, direct imperatives. Now look at the difference between these 2 sentences. Let me start with this first sentence. The next thing that should be done is a concept should be chosen. It's kind of weak and passive. But look at this strong and imperative one, which is completely polite, unlike what many people think about imperative. When we say imperative, oh, it's impolite. No, it's not, of course, if used correctly. So instead of saying, the next thing that should be done is a concept should be chosen, well, that's kind of weak and passive, as we said. Say, first, choose a concept. Period. That's it. It's strong and imperative. Because after all, you're writing a set of instructions, so you can use imperative mood, and you should use it, obviously. Your entire guide should be structured around these action-oriented commands. Start by grabbing a blank notebook. Write the name of the concept at the top. Next, explain it in the simplest terms you can. Pretend you're talking to a middle schooler. When you get stuck, circle the area where you feel uncertain, then return to your source material. You see, this is absolutely polite, but it's much stronger than using this indirect and passive language, okay? So, my friends, using the imperative makes your writing feel direct, confident, and incredibly easy to follow. It removes ambiguity and tells your reader exactly what to do. Your mission is to fill your guide with these clear, commanding verbs. And next, let's move to a crucial writing technique: analogy and metaphor. Complex or abstract ideas are notoriously difficult to explain. A brilliant way to make them concrete and memorable is by using analogies, which means a comparison between two things for the purpose of explanation. In the episode, I used several. I said active recall is like lifting a mental weight. The forgetting curve is a steep, slippery slope. Spaced repetition is like watering a plant at strategic intervals. These analogies make the concepts instantly understandable. For your writing challenge, you should try to create your own. If you're explaining spaced repetition, you could compare it to building a brick wall. You have to let the mortar on each layer dry before adding the next one. If you're explaining the Feynman technique, you could compare it to being a detective, looking for the holes in your own story. But of course, I highly encourage you to come up with your own analogies. Now, before you start writing, brainstorm a powerful analogy for your chosen technique. And trust me, a great analogy will do more teaching than paragraphs of dry explanation ever could. It will be the central, memorable image that your reader walks away with. Okay, so that's about using analogies and metaphor. Finally, let's talk about structure and sequencing. A how-to guide lives or dies by its structure. A confused reader will give up. You need to guide them logically from beginning to end. The best way to do this is with clear sequencing language. Use transition words to signal the steps in the process. For the beginning, you can use things like to begin with, the first step is, or start by. For subsequent steps, you can use next, then, after that, or once you've done that. And for the final step, you can say finally, or the last step is to do whatever, or you can use to wrap up. Now, these words are like signposts on a highway telling the reader where they are and where they are going next. Now, here's a simple, powerful structure you can adopt for your 500-word guide. Now, first start with the introduction, with approximately 75 words. Start with a hook. Describe a common learning problem your technique solves. Briefly introduce the technique by name and state its main benefit. For example, the Feynman Technique is a simple but powerful method for truly understanding a topic, not just memorizing it. And then continue to the how-to body, with approximately 350 words. Well, this is the core of your guide. Break the technique down into 3 to 4 clear, actionable steps. Start each step with an imperative verb. Use your central analogy to explain why the step is important. Use your specific, real-life learning scenario to give a concrete example for each step. And finally, finish with a conclusion. Again, approximately 75 words. Briefly summarize the process and reiterate the technique's power, and end with a persuasive statement encouraging your reader to try it for themselves. So for example, you can say, while it feels more demanding than passive reading, the clarity and confidence you'll gain are well worth the effort. By combining the directness of the imperative mood, the memorability of a strong analogy, and the clarity of logical sequencing, you will create a piece of writing that is not only informative, but genuinely helpful. You will have successfully used the Feynman technique on the Feynman technique itself. Good luck with that. And again, you can share your writing pieces with me and I will give you my opinion. But it's not the end of the episode yet. We still have our discussion questions. That's coming next. Don't go anywhere. I'll be right back. Okay, my friends, we've explored some powerful tools today, but the most interesting part of any tool is how different people use it, right? To get us thinking more deeply about applying these ideas, here are some questions for you to ponder and ideally to share your thoughts on in the comments section. Let me start with the first idea, the illusion of competence in your life. Now think back on your learning experiences. Can you identify a specific time when you were a victim of the illusion of competence? A time when you spent hours rereading or highlighting, felt confident, but then couldn't recall the information when it mattered? What did that experience teach you about the difference between familiarity and true knowledge? That's the first question. My second question is, which technique resonates most? Now, of the 3 techniques we talked about, active recall, spaced repetition, and the Feynman technique, which one are you most excited to try? Now, why does this particular method resonate with your personal learning style or the specific challenges you're facing right now? My third question, about your personal learning stack. The world is full of amazing learning tools, both digital and analog. Do you use any apps like Anki, Quizlet, Notion, or physical systems like the Lightner box system or bullet journaling to manage your learning? Share what you use and why you find it effective. And remember, my friends, your recommendation might be a game changer for someone else. So be generous about that. And my next question is about learning by teaching, the Feynman effect. Now, the Feynman Technique is based on the idea of learning through teaching. Have you ever experienced this phenomenon yourself? Think about a time you had to explain a concept to a colleague, a friend, or a family member. Did the act of explaining it solidify or clarify your own understanding? Well, let me know. And finally, let's talk beyond the classroom. How can you apply these smarter learning techniques outside of traditional study? For example, how could you use active recall to better remember the names of people you meet at a networking event? How could you use a form of spaced repetition to master a new process at your job? Now let's brainstorm some creative and real-world applications for what we learned today. I genuinely look forward to reading your insights. Your experiences are a valuable part of this shared learning journey. And with that, my friends, we close the book, or rather, we actively recall the key points from our second episode of Lifelong Learning, the theme for this week on English Plus Podcast. We've added active recall, spaced repetition, and the Feynman Technique to our cognitive toolbox. Now remember, these tools work best when they're used, so pick one this week and put it into practice. And of course, as always, if you want to dig deeper, you can find show notes, transcripts, magazine articles with all the activities I told you about on my website, EnglishPlusPodcast.com. Just give it a try, go there, and I'm sure that you will find something to your liking and suitable for your interests. And if you want to unlock access to everything I create on English Plus Podcast and on the website EnglishPlusPodcast.com, you can do that by subscribing on Apple Podcasts or on Patreon. Now, I will have to say the premium content on the website is available only to my Patreon subscribers, because there's no way for me to do that on Apple Podcasts. Apple Podcasts is only for the premium audio content, but on Patreon you get both, the audio content and the written content on the website. With that being said, thank you very much for investing your valuable time with me today. And my friends, trust me when I say the most important thing you can learn is how to learn. So go out there and build some lasting knowledge. And remember that this theme is still not over. We still have 2 more episodes to add. So make sure to come back to learn more about lifelong learning and how to become a lifelong learner. I'm Danny, and this was a new episode from English Plus Podcast. Thank you very much for listening. I will see you again next time.